Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our first book club conversation of 2021. I hope you've been enjoying book club so far. And if you're new, a big welcome. Thank you for joining us for the first time. Every month, we pick a new book to read together, and we have a Facebook group where we chat about the book throughout the month. We host small Zoom discussions with our members, and then best part, at the end of every month, I get to show up here and talk with the author. You can always find out more if you're new at goop.com/goop book club. So today I am thrilled to be talking with Kate Baer. Kate is a writer and a poet, and What Kind of Woman is her first book, which we've been reading during January. So several months ago, a very dear friend of mine told me about Kate, and she said, you have to follow this poet on Instagram. She has a book coming out. And at first I was a little skeptical, a poet on Instagram, but I'm so glad that I followed Kate. I can truly say that Kate is a joy to follow on Instagram, which you really cannot say about many people these days. And this book was just such a gift. If you haven't read it, it's divided into 3 parts. And the first part loosely explores sisterhood, friendship, dating. The middle part questions what it means to be a good partner or a good wife. And the third part looks at motherhood and what comes next. And I laughed, I cried reading these poems. I screenshotted them so hard to text to friends and say, this reminded me of this night that we went out, or what do you guys think about this? It's just such a beautiful book. And I think Julianne in our book club put it best the other day when she says that Kate has this way of just cutting through everything and getting right to the heart of the matter. So it's super admirable, and I am excited to talk to her today. Just before I bring Kate onto the screen, a few housekeeping items. We are live today, so I'm sorry in advance for any tech issues, but on the plus side, you can send in your own questions for Kate in real time into the comment box on YouTube. So if you're watching this live, go ahead and send your questions in, and the team will shoot them over to us. So I'm very excited to welcome Kate to the screen, and I want to say thank you, especially because she's in the middle of a snowstorm and moving right now. So she is dialing in from her bedroom, which we really appreciate. And Kate, please come on onto the screen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy.
Thank you for being here. It's so good to see your face. And Kate, I know I already asked you, but do you mind starting off by reading a poem for us?
No, not at all. What poem would you like me to read?
I would like you to read Moon Song, please.
I would love to. This is called Moon Song. You are not an evergreen unchanged by the pitiless snow. You are not a photo, a brand, a character written for sex or house or show. You do not have to choose one or the other, a dream or a dreamer, the bird or the birder. You may be a woman of commotion and quiet, magic and brain. You can be a mother and a poet, a wife and a lover. You can dance on the graves you dug on Tuesday, pulling out the bones of yourself you began to miss. You can be the sun and the moon, the dance of victory song.
So beautiful. Thank you. So I think I want to start a very wise woman in our book club, Julianne, who I mentioned just before. She had put it best, this question. She wanted to know, how did you get so insightful at such a young age? Were you born that way, or was it self-actualization? Which I thought was such a fun way of putting it. But it is true that the themes you're exploring in the book, from desire to these different facets of womanhood, everything feels so insightful. And where do you draw from that type of intuition, or that, like, how did you get to this place?
I love that, Julianne. Thank you for calling me young, and also thank you for calling me insightful. Those are such nice things to say. I don't know. I honestly would call myself a late bloomer. So, you know how some people say they are old souls. I am a new soul. I've never been here before. I don't know if I feel particularly insightful, but I do think, just in general, a writer's job is to pay attention. And I think that is probably more it than anything else, paying attention to, what's kind of going on behind the curtain and what are the little details that are little universal truths that we all think about but don't say. I would say that is more of it than any wisdom.
Yeah, I think one thing that really stuck out to me reading the collection is how you put the mundane pieces of life right up against our deepest, darkest desires. And that really is how we go about our days. It's not like most of us don't sit down and think, okay, for this 30-minute block, I'm going to think about like laundry, like, and then for this 30-minute block, I'm going to think about what happens if we die. It's like there's
Right.
just this constant inner monologue going all day. And I think that's something that's so interesting in this collection. I thought about that a lot of with poems with motherhood, how it's this cataloging of things that are super mundane, like taking the garbage out, but then these much like deeper truths. So I love that juxtaposition that you get at.
Yeah. Thank you.
How much, I'm curious because there's a few poems in the book that I love that were about advice. So there's the bridal shower. I think there's the wedding one. There's the one that I love. I'll just read part of it. On page 33, or this one's short, like a wife. The week before my wedding, my friend's dad said, just don't get fat like other wives do. And so I brined him in a deep salt bath, added thyme and celery, devoured him whole in one big bite so he could see just how hungry a woman can be. I had a good laugh over that one. It was so brilliant. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you keep a notebook? And when people say these crazy things to you, do you write them down? And then do you think, oh, this is going to be a poem? Or how do you collect? Because so much of it felt like things people had said to you, and then you turned into these stories, really.
Yeah. I mean, that was 10 years ago. So I did not write it down then, but you know how some things stick with you. And that one stuck with me. As far as the advice for baby showers and bridal showers, we've all been to those events where you were supposed to write, advice on the cards and stick them in the box. And I was just thinking about that one day and working on this book. And I thought about what I would really want to write down. And so that was kind of the inspiration behind that. But as far as things people say to me, I'm not, for anyone watching who knows me in real life, I'm not cataloging all of your our conversations, but I do think there are some things, everyone has those things that people say to you that stick with you 10 years, 20 years later. And I don't know, I've heard funny advice to never be friends with a writer because you never know what will come back up.
I think too what was interesting. I mean, there were those personal quotes that were so specific, but then there were a lot of refrains that were echoed that were things that I've heard so many times. I think often of the poem Female Candidate and Fat Girl, which were written in a similar style. And we were talking about in our book club chat, who did we think that those phrases were coming from? So the one is commentary that we've all heard about female candidates, whether it's that they're trying too hard in the way they look, they're not trying hard enough, they're aggressive, they should be doing XYZ different. Like, and those are so familiar. Those are things that we're so steeped in our culture that we sometimes don't even notice we're getting these messages.
Yeah. Yeah. It was sad how easy it was to come up with those. That could have been another few pages long for either of those pieces. Um, I hope that the conversation will change. I do think that there are a lot of conversations that are changing right now, especially within the last year. I think we're headed in a good direction. I hope as far as things like female candidates and body type. But yeah, I think anyone raised, especially in 80s culture or 90s culture, and especially before that, can really resonate with, beauty magazines And of course, still today, who, that are putting those phrases in our head. And, we're also pulling that from conversations with our families, unfortunately, and our friends. And I hope the conversation's changing. It takes, it takes time, and it takes personal commitment to trying to do better, especially when we talk about ourselves.
And I think the collection goes so far to show how important language is. So there's the poem towards the end called Body Back. And I love this line. A woman on the screen says she's getting her body back from where she does not know. And so it's just thinking, when we say these lines that seem throwaway, like, oh, someone's going to get their body back after pregnancy. It's like, there's such asinine things to say, but I think sometimes we need to be called out on them.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just as guilty of those things. And, we can talk about as much as we want about things like the garbage media says or other people say, but I think what's most important is what we say. When we talk about our bodies, and talk about getting our bodies back, or kind of talk down about what we look like, birth or no birth, you're talking down about every woman around you, every woman who's listening to you. And those kind of things can be so hurtful. And I do think that changing that conversation starts with us more than anything else.
And I think there was such a sense of sisterhood in the book. The first section, especially to me, it reminded me of so many of my dear friends. And I was wondering, how did you conceive of the three parts of the book? Did you originally think you're going to set out to explore these sections of womanhood, or what was kind of your driving desire? Because it really felt like, unlike some poetry collections, there kind of was this beginning, middle, end, almost in a way, where you were going on this adventure.
Yeah. I didn't set out to have three sections. When I was first kind of putting together things in a manuscript, they were kind of jumbled. It wasn't until later that we realized there were three themes. I've said this a few times, and I know it sounds really cliche, but when I sat down to write this over the course of about a year, it was almost as if I'd always had this to say. And it not that it wasn't hard and difficult to write, but that it kind of was there all along. And I don't know, those three themes are pretty prevalent in a lot of people's lives. They are in mine. Friendship is really important to me. My girlfriends are, one of the loves of my life. And so, that to me is a central theme in my life. And so I think that's why it comes out in the book. I'm also married. I have a spouse. And so that's in there too. And I also have 4 children. So I didn't sit down to write about them necessarily. But because those three things are a big part of my life, that kind of happened organically.
Yeah, and I think, coming from someone, I don't have children, but the motherhood section was one of my favorite things that I've ever read on motherhood. And my friend Dylan, who's such a big fan of yours, one of her favorite poems was Deliverance. And I thought this was just such a beautiful way of describing motherhood and delivering in such short lines. You were born in the morning, sunlight blazing against the sharp gasp of labor. In an instant you arrive, loud and longing. Look, your father says, a sloppy miracle. What is the word for when the light leaves the body? What is the word for when it at last returns? Where did this poem come from for you?
When I got unexpectedly pregnant with my 4th, and it was really difficult. It was a big surprise, and I was even more surprised by experiencing something that I didn't even know there was a word for it, but depression during pregnancy. And it was definitely the lowest point in my life. I've never felt that empty and sad, especially, and it was, especially difficult because, this is supposed to be a happy thing. And Yeah, it was. I wrote that poem about the experience of delivering that baby. And once he was here, I felt an immediate relief. And it was confirmed to me kind of that, there was a lot of biological things at play there too. And I know a lot of people have resonated with that poem for a lot of different reasons. But that's what it meant to me. I felt an immediate relief of having him here and kind of getting back, some autonomy. And yeah, that's, I also, it's one of the biggest compliments I get when people who don't have children enjoy that section. I know motherhood can be kind of put into a niche category, which is something that's always been frustrating to me because while we all might not have children, we all have had a mother in some capacity. It's impossible to be here without one. And so I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, of course. And it's stunning because I think what was so amazing to me about that section of the book is I could really imagine the emotions that were coming through each poem. And so I love that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So Carrie asked, which was something that came up in our book club Zoom chat, how did you realize poetry was your medium? And did you try other formats before setting or deciding to go with poetry?
Yeah. I've always wrote poetry, starting in second grade. That's always been something I've done. I mean, really bad poetry, of course, especially in those teenage years. It wasn't something though that I practiced on a regular basis until recently. I was working on short stories and a novel, and I started to cheat on those things with poetry. And I just realized that it was a medium that I felt really comfortable in, that I really was enjoying, and it turned into a full-blown love affair. And I haven't really looked back since.
I love this question too from Catherine. Do you know when a poem is going to be funny or serious when you start writing it? Do you know if it's going to be satirical or heartfelt?
I think in some ways, sure. I think I love that question. Thanks, Catherine. I think in some ways, yes, although I've been surprised plenty of times.
And can you talk a little bit about your process? Another thing the group was fascinated with your blackout poems that you post on social, because they are just, I think, the best example of what a clapback can be. So can you explain how those came about and how you think about them now, and also how you deal with the stress of that, and but channeling it into creativity as well?
Yeah. I don't read reviews at all, but it's kind of hard when there are emails and messages right in your inbox to ignore those completely. And, for a long time, I just deleted anything like that. And then, it was just really random. One day I decided on a whim to just like screenshot it because I don't know, I was looking at one and the words were kind of rearranging in front of me. And I decided to make a poem out of it. And it was really fun. It was like a way to kind of take back the power, if that makes any sense. And yeah, I used to be really bummed out. I still am pretty bummed out about a lot of messages. Although now when I see them in my inbox, I just hope they use creative nouns.
I would love to have you take over the Goop inbox one day and reply to some messages.
I
You
can
can use
imagine.
your brain.
I would love that.
um, this is a good question too from Elizabeth. I found to take back a life to be incredibly powerful. What sparked your delineation of learning to desire versus the desire to be wanted? And this was something we talked about a lot with this collection, how you explore desires and getting comfortable with them. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I should just speak for myself. As I get older and as I experience my relationships, and just my place in life as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, as a person in this world, I find that I find that just becoming a bigger and bigger truth. And I think that's pretty common for a lot of women coming into themselves and wanting to have more autonomy over the direction of your life. I've been given that advice a few times from, older women who I really respect, that you only get one chance. And that's a lot of it. A lot of that came from that for the poem.
Kristen is asking about the imagery in the collection, which is interesting. I think there are a few things that come up a few times. She says birds, water, decay. Was that something? Are you visual when you're writing? That's a great list. Are you visual when you're writing, or do these things, do you see symbols in retrospect?
That's a great question. I've never really thought about that. I think that's just part of writing, show, don't tell, kind of one of the rules of writing. But yeah, I didn't think about decay being a theme, but I like that.
Kathleen's asking if your children are readers and writers. Do you see any budding writers in the group, or what do your kids like to read these days?
Yeah, people like to ask me if they've read this book, and I'm just like, no, they're reading Dogman and Garfield. No, they don't read this particular book, and they do write their own stories and their own little poems and their own funny things. I think it's pretty hard to tell, even for a 10-year-old, where their life is going. But I would be thrilled if that was the direction one of their lives took.
Another part of the book that everyone in book club was fascinated with was the author's note. And I think this is the funniest author's note I've ever read. I'll just read these one line. Names, characters, bodies, behaviors, and incidents in which men are rude or foul are either the product of the author's imagination or absolutely true. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is either purely coincidental or an act of deep-seated revenge. Mm-hmm. How did that come to you? It's brilliant.
Yeah, we really debated whether or not to include an author's note at all. And then I was kind of just thinking, no, I'm not going to put one in there. And I, just towards the end of the publishing process, I was thinking about how whenever a book like this comes out, everyone wants to know, is it true? Did these things happen? And so I decided to kind of answer it there.
I'm definitely glad you included it. It's amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
Stephanie asks, how do you know when a poem is done? Do you go back and rewrite often, or do you write and then put it to bed?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most difficult parts of writing poetry, is knowing when it's done. I often put things to bed. I often put things on ice is usually what I say. I go over it many times. I'm often, in my coffee shop with my headphones on, saying it out loud over and over and over again. There's a lot of letting go in writing, I think with any genre. And so especially with poetry, there does have to be an endpoint eventually, either it's in the trash or in its finished form. And yeah, there's just some letting go that happens there.
How often do you read your poetry out loud? Because to me, it was a very sensory experience. And there's the poem Crescendo that I love. That moment, the moment in the argument when the only sound between us is the buzz of locusts, cars from a passing street, God licking her fingertips, wondering how this is going to go. And there were so many beautiful moments like that where you brought in the auditory world, and I really felt like I was hearing something and I wanted to read it out loud myself. So is that an experience you have as a writer, or how often do you read out loud?
I didn't start, when I started to write poetry on a daily basis, that was something I had to learn, was that reading it out loud was really important for the editing process. To be able to hear it. And so now it's just something that I do very often, very regularly. I I never read poetry out loud until this book came out. Now I'm getting pretty used to it. And it does take a different form when you read it out loud. The process of recording the audiobook was really interesting. I found myself getting emotional when, I've read these pieces many times, but to read them out loud has been such a different experience. But yeah, I think reading out loud, just for anyone who's trying to write poetry, is a really important part of the process.
What was the hardest or most emotional poem in the book for you?
I really debated whether or not to put College Boy in there. I really went back and forth. We almost cut it out. I should say I almost cut it out. That one was difficult to put in there. The rest of them, they were fine. When I read it out loud, though, there's a poem about my grandmother who passed away this year that was difficult to read. I read it at her funeral, and it's hard for me to read out loud even now. And the ones about motherhood, especially the one that we talked about earlier, about having my last baby, gets me too, just because I can still feel that it's been not that long ago.
I think too, as a reader, one of the things that was so emotional and poignant for me is how a lot of the poems explore the gap between how we thought something was going to be and then how it turns out. And there's an excitement and a nervousness and a hope around that, but also a grief in that sometimes you have to let go of the way you thought something was going to be, even if the way it turns out is better. There's still that moment of grief. And I loved like Curveball, and I think Missed Connections were ones to me that felt, as a reader, they were like a little hard or tender to read. But I love how you explored that throughout.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that anytime we're peeling back the curtain on things, I think that's why a TV show like Fleabag is really popular. You're talking about something that's so universal, dating and relationships and the weirdness of family. But when you talk about it in a very real and raw, vulnerable way, I think it's just so much easier to connect with people. And that is one of my favorite parts about poetry, is just kind of getting to the heart of it as soon as possible.
No, and I mean, poetry is having that's been on display, especially with Amanda Gorman. I think it's so, going back to what Julianne from our book club said, there's a way that poetry really can so quickly bring you to the very depths of something and really strike a chord in a way that other forms of writing might just take a little bit longer or circle around to get there. So it is so resonant. And I think it's amazing when we have moments where poetry opens up to more people or more people find it.
Yeah. And I also think that poetry can be such a comfort in difficult times. And this year has been so difficult in many ways. And I think people are just turning to poetry right now for that reason.
We have one more audience question. Allison, I can definitely relate to this. I cry every time I read deleted sentences. It's a punch to the gut and makes me feel so connected to my husband each time. Can you talk about how that poem came to you?
Sure. That poem is very frustrating to me only because it's a favorite of so many and a favorite of mine. And I wrote that in about 15 minutes. And that's not the case for any other piece in here or anything that I've written recently. And so it's frustrating to me in that way, but also was a very visceral experience writing it. I was waiting for my husband to get home. It was not one of my work days. I was home with the kids. And I wrote it literally as my kids were running around me. And so thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's one of my favorites too.
Okay, and then the last question that Leah from our book club wanted to know, are there other poets that you're reading and admiring, or what else in general are you reading these days beyond poetry?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I read poetry every day. I love to read modern poets, contemporary poets who are alive right now, Amanda Gorman. And I don't know if you've heard of Olivia Gatwood. She has a beautiful collection of poetry. I also fall back on favorites: Wanda Coleman, Audre Lorde, Maya Angelou, Mary Oliver. They are tried and true for me, for sure. Books I'm reading. Whenever I'm asked this question, I can't think of a single book I've ever read. I have no idea what I read last week, but I have an Instagram account dedicated just to recording that, so I can remember. It is Baer Books. My last name in books. I just read a beautiful book. Couldn't tell you the name for $1 million, but I loved it very much. And Margaret Atwood is definitely my favorite author, and I read her books. I come back to her all the time.
I love your book account because I'm like you, where I don't really want to know too much about a book before I start.
Oh.
My favorite experience is when I haven't read the reviews or haven't even really read the jacket copy in advance. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely with you on that front, and I love that you do that.
Yeah, I never read the reviews or the summary. I try to go in as blind as possible. You know, if someone recommends to me a book to read over and over, I just read it. I don't want to hear anything you have to say about it until after I'm finished. I read the Da Vinci Code 10, 15 years after it came out, and I had no idea, and it was great. I somehow avoided all the spoilers for that. So, yeah, I recommend that method to anyone who is an avid reader.
I love that. And then what's next for you? Because so people don't know, you blogged for many years. Now you have this amazing poetry collection. What do you think you'll write or do next? Where are you interested in going?
Yeah, I have some things on the horizon. A book coming out that should be announced soon, and yeah, it's been wild. I have been doing a lot of work in my bedroom, which I hate because of the pandemic. My back is killing me trying to write in bed. But yeah, stay tuned for that. I'm really excited about what's next.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being with us here today and for everything you've done throughout the month. If anyone hasn't read What Kind of Woman yet, please do pick up a copy. And Kate, you're wonderful. Thank you for being such a light, and I love talking to you today.
Oh, this was so fun. I'm happy to do it, and I enjoyed chatting too.
I'm so glad. So Kate, we're gonna let you leave, and then everyone stay on. I'm gonna tell you what book we're reading next if you're interested.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
So our February book is called The Orchard by David Hopen. This is a big, ambitious coming of age story. It begins with a high schooler named Ari Eden who finds out that his parents are moving him from their ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn to a glitzy suburb in Miami. And when Ari gets there, he is befriended by an unlikely and magnetic circle of high schoolers, and they get into some interesting life-altering trouble together. I think what I love most about this book is how intimately explores what it feels like to be a young person, to fall in love for the first time, to get your heart broken, to have these intellectual desires and curiosities that feel so burning that you have to explore. So I hope you can pick up a copy and join us. You can go to goop.com/goop book club for more info, and we will be chatting in our Facebook group and posting the dates for reads and events for the coming months. So thank you all for being here today, and we will hopefully talk to you soon. Bye.